Before smartphones, before the internet, before text messages or even the radio, there was one revolutionary idea that changed everything: talking across distance. Not by horse, not by telegram, but by voice. The telephone. This is the incredible story of how the telephone came to be visionaries and inventors racing against time, of sound carried by electricity, and of one name that history never forgot: Alexander Graham Bell. But Bell wasn't alone in this quest. He was part of a global chaotic, passionate scramble to make real-time voice communication possible. A race filled with lawsuits, inventions, stolen ideas, and accidental breakthroughs. Let us trace this journey from the earliest concepts of transmitting sound to the invention that would ring in a new era for humanity. Before we dive in, leave a comment below. What would you like to see us cover in future episodes? Long before the first ring ever sounded, the dream of communicating across distance without physical presence captivated the human imagination. In the 17th and 18th centuries, scientists began exploring sound in new ways. Robert Hooke, in the 1660s, experimented with sound transmission through a taut wire what we'd now call a string telephone. Fast forward to the early 1800s, and electricity entered the scene. Inventors and physicists like Elazar Volta were pioneering electrical current. By the 1830s, Samuel Morse introduced the telegraph, a breakthrough in long-distance messaging. It sent dots and dashes, not voices, but it opened a new world. Still, people wanted more. What if, instead of coded beeps, actual spoken words could travel through wires? In 1854, French inventor Charles Bourseul proposed the idea of transmitting speech electrically. He wrote in a technical journal that a diaphragm could be used to modulate current based on sound waves. Concept foundational to the telephone. Yet, this idea remained just that. Theory. Nobody had built it. Nobody had heard a voice carried over wire. But this vision, this possibility, was growing clearer. And in the coming decades, a few brilliant minds would take the leap from concept to reality. One of those minds belonged to Elisha Gray, an American electrical engineer and inventor. By the early 1870s, Gray was knee-deep in telegraphic innovations. He understood electrical circuits and was fascinated by the idea of transmitting tones and voices. Gray developed what he called a musical telegraph, which could transmit multiple notes over a single wire. It was a significant stepping stone toward voice transmission. In 1874, he began working on an idea for a voice transmitter, a device that could convert sound into electrical signals and send them through a wire. But Gray wasn't alone. Across the U.S., in Boston, a Scottish-born teacher of the deaf named Alexander Graham Bell was exploring the very same idea. Bell's background in acoustics and speech gave him a unique perspective. His family legacy was in elocution, and Bell's own wife and mother were deaf. Bell teamed up with machinist Thomas Watson, and together, they began building devices to convert vocal vibrations into electrical impulses. And in early 1876, everything came to a head. On February 14, 1876, Elisha Gray submitted a patent caveat, a legal notice of intent to file a patent for his telephone design. Just hours earlier, Alexander Graham Bell's lawyer had submitted Bell's full patent application. The result? Bell's patent got priority. This race, a matter of hours, would spark decades of legal battles and accusations of theft and collusion. But Bell had the patent. Now he just had to prove it worked. March 10, 1876. A modest workshop in Boston. Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Watson stood on the edge of history. Bell leaned toward his experimental transmitter and spoke words that would become legendary. "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." Watson, working in the next room, heard Bell's voice clearly through the receiver. It worked. Voice had traveled through wire. The telephone was born. Bell documented the event in his notebook, but in that moment, he may not have realized how revolutionary his invention truly was. Unlike the telegraph, which required trained operators to translate messages into Morse code, the telephone was intuitive. Anyone who could speak could use it. Soon after, Bell began public demonstrations. In 1877, he founded the Bell Telephone Company. By 1880, there were over 30,000 telephones in use across the United States. Still, the invention remained controversial. Elisha Gray, among others, challenged Bell's patent. Lawsuits ensued over 600 of them. Why Bell's patent, despite its ambiguities, was the first to clearly claim a method of transmitting voice electrically. And Bell, with his charisma, scientific skill, and legal backing, became the face of the telephone. The earliest telephones were simple yet ingenious. At the core was a transmitter and a receiver. The transmitter, often called a microphone, used a diaphragm that vibrated when someone spoke into it. These vibrations altered an electric current in real time. The current traveled through wires to the receiver, where a similar diaphragm vibrated to recreate the original sound. The materials were crude by modern standards: iron plates, acid-filled batteries, hand-wound coils, but the science was sound. The first telephone lines were direct: one line, one phone. No switching, no network. If you wanted to call someone, you had to run a wire directly to their house. Soon, switchboards were introduced. Operators manually connected calls by plugging wires into a central board. This allowed multiple users to share a single network, an essential step toward scalability. And even as the technology advanced, the essential principle remained. Turn voice into electric signal, send it, and turn it back into voice. It was analog, but it was magical. In the span of just a few years, what began as a lab experiment had become a functioning system, changing the way people lived and worked. The telephone didn't just change America, it transformed the world. After the success of Bell's demonstrations, other countries began installing telephone lines. In 1878, the first telephone exchange opened in New Haven, Connecticut. That same year, London followed with its own system. The Bell Telephone Company evolved into the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, AT&T 85, a name that would dominate telecommunications for over a century. Other inventors improved the technology. In 1889, Almon Stroger, frustrated with human operators, invented the first automatic telephone exchange. No more plugging in cords, just a dial. By the turn of the 20th century, telephones were common in urban areas. Businesses adopted them quickly. Households followed more slowly, due to cost. But telephone culture was born. Phone booths appeared in cities. Operators became a vital profession. Phone numbers became identity markers. And as the 20th century progressed, long-distance calling became possible. In 1915, Alexander Graham Bell made the first transcontinental phone call from New York to San Francisco. The world was shrinking. Fast, the telephone didn't stay the same for long. Innovation never sleeps. The 1920s and 30s saw clearer sound and better hardware. Candlestick phones evolved into rotary desk models. Lines expanded into rural areas. World War II further accelerated telephone development. Secure communications were vital. The invention of coaxial cable and early microwave transmission laid the groundwork for future innovations. Then came the 1960s and the era of consumer expansion. More homes, more phones, more networks. In 1962, the Telstar satellite enabled the first transatlantic television and telephone signals. Now, voice could travel not just through wires, but through space. The 1960s and 70s introduced touch-tone dialing. No more rotary wheels, just buttons. By the 1980s, mobile phones emerged, clunky and expensive. They were a glimpse of the future. Cell towers replaced copper lines. Analog gave way to digital. Then came the 1990s. Voicemail, caller ID, cordless phones. And by the early 2000s, the rise of smartphones. But all of this, the entire global network of communication, can be traced back to one man's voice in 1876, calling out across a room. The telephone didn't just change how we communicate, changed the structure of society. It shrank the world. Families separated by distance could speak daily. Businesses could operate across time zones. Emergency services became faster. The very idea of time and presence evolved. It paved the way for the Internet. The infrastructure wires, networks, signals was repurposed and improved to carry data. Then voice over Internet and eventually video. Alexander Graham Bell, meanwhile, remained a lifelong inventor. He worked on optical communication, hydrofoils, and even aviation. But nothing eclipsed every time your phone rings. Every time you hear a voice from thousands of miles away. Remember that moment in 1876. "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." That simple sentence became the start of a global transformation. The telephone isn't just an invention, it's a revolution that never stopped ringing.